What's going on, y'all? It's your girl, your cousin Tanisha Peoples live with another Talk That Real Shit with my homies Jason B. Allen and Nehemiah Frank. Today we got some special guests. We have special guests every week, but man, I mean, you know what? I don't know what to say about El Mekki. El Mekki is like an uncle or father to me. He's the scholar I aspire to be. So I'm so glad that he got some time to come over here and talk this real shit with us today. And we also have Mr. Jason Terrell. He's about to drop some knowledge too. So thank you guys so much for joining our show today. And as always, we go kick it off with, the current events, any BS that happened over the weekend, or, stuff that we just want to rejoice about because, we got to do that as Black people. So what happened this weekend, y'all? What's going on?
Well, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we did our official clapback to the city for legally removing the Black Lives Matter mural from the historic Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood district. And if you know anything about Tulsa, for those who haven't seen the show before, Tulsa is home to the original Black Wall Street. It was dubbed that by Booker T. Washington himself. And in 1921, it was destroyed in a matter of 48 hours by a white mob.
So tell us, because I saw you post some stuff, Neo, about they people were repainting the Black Lives Matter sign everywhere. Like what's the situation looking like? As you told us before the show started that y'all were getting chased by police. Like it was it was looking like the 60s. Oh, I wasn't supposed to say nothing. But they know now. They know now, my bad.
Yeah, it definitely felt like the 60s. I mean, it was a act of civil disobedience. We were just protesting, but a bunch of painters popped out of nowhere and painted BLM in front of City Hall, as a way to kind of stick it back to the government for removing the Black Lives Matter mural that was painted just ahead of the Trump rally in Tulsa during Juneteenth weekend. So the city actually, they didn't just power wash the original Black Lives Matter sign off the street. They actually peeled the street up and redid the entire street. And, I kind of see it as a pool being drained after a few Black kids had jumped in it, a whites only pool. So yeah, it's crazy. But now people all across the city are painting Black Lives Matter. They're painting their driveways. They're painting it, on the sidewalks. They're painting it at their churches or other houses of worship. And I think that's pretty cool. So
yeah. Nino, I'm sorry for putting you out there if you got warrants. Like, I apologize, y'all. I
haven't phone calls yet, so I think I'm probably in the clear.
That's good, brother.
What else is going on, y'all?
It's related to Tulsa. The Greenwood Bank. That's something I've been talking to JBA about it. But Killer Mike, Andrew Young, I believe that I forget the other brother's name, who was he was the founder of a television network. Raymond, forget the brother's name, but they started a Black-owned bank called Greenwood Bank. And so it seems like they've gotten a lot of they're in a seed funding round. So they raised about $3 million to date to get this bank off the ground. But the idea is to embrace this digital kind of banking platform. And so, I thought in the spirit of the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, I thought that was really dope.
Yeah, we reached out to them today. So I'm hoping to score an interview with them since, they decided to name their bank after our community. In the press release that came out a few days ago, it talked about how, they're wanting to recircle the Black dollar, in our communities, which is something that we haven't had since integration, right? We kind of got the short end we did get the short end of the stick with that. So they're trying to empower our communities financially, which I think is great.
Yeah, I love it. I love to see it. I signed up for an account. It's 3,000, almost 10,000 people on a waiting list. I'm on a waiting list for it, but I got to support where I can.
Yeah. If y'all could put that in the chat, I hadn't heard this. This is good stuff. Excited to hear that.
That's Mike, right? Killer Mike doing that.
Killer Mike and Andrew Young and a couple of others in the Atlanta area. So it's good to see it, and hopefully more of us will invest in community. You guys have heard me talk about Powernomics probably about the last 2 weeks. That's what I'm currently reading. And it's super dope. It talks about a lot of these things that need to be done in regards to how we can truly gain the power that we deserve in this country. So yeah, kudos to them for starting that up. And Neil, hopefully they'll connect with you and even get something going actually at Greenwood. That would be super.
I agree
dope as well.
100%. Hopefully.
El Mackey, you about to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say in bad news, but not surprising news, the Fraternal Order of Police in Philadelphia, as with the majority of people of color being the residents of this city, they endorsed 45, which is no surprise, right? The FOP president, he's a known rabid racist, and that continues this whole occupying force mentality that they bring when they come into the city to police communities of color. So that's just a continual process. Nothing new, but it's just important to make sure that people are when they're always talking about like, oh, the good police officers and the good this and the good that, the system itself is built against a particular community.
Right.
So that's a continuation, more of the same.
Also,
I mean, in Chicago, it's like I'm on the fence about not necessarily the good cops thing, because there's a system in place. When we talk about like historically how the police was established was to capture runaway slaves, but
right.
in Chicago we actually had a march a couple of months ago in which the Black police officers stood against the brutality and the injustices and stuff like that. So it's similar to when like they're trapped under these umbrellas of their profession with unions. And it's like that union message or rhetoric represents all of them when it really doesn't. So I'm just trying to I think we need to have a deeper conversation about that, because it's definitely something that, is kind of volatile as to what people think about. Are there actually good cops, or are they all bad cops because they're under this umbrella of law and order?
Yeah, I mean, it goes deep, right, Tanisha? So even with that, it's still about this power, right? Like, so Nesby's a white man, right? And so for him to say like, hey, you know what, like, and there are many people in the ranks and files of the police officers like, yo, that's not who I would want, right?
Right.
It's kind of a few years ago, Randy Weingarten and the team were, I don't remember, it was the NDA or the AFT, like they endorsed somebody, when a lot of the members was like, yo, we didn't even vote on that, right? They're like,
Right.
well, you put us in power, so we decide what you want.
Yeah.
Right. But as quiet as it's kept, my father and mother used to tell stories about when the police were going to raid Black Panther Party. There were Black cops, not a lot, but there were a few Black cops who would call and give the heads up. And that's when they would take us as children and put us somewhere else, so we were out of harm's way. But it was Black cops who would give the heads up, like, yo, these racists are on their way to y'all.
Yeah, that's what's up.
So it's some nuance there.
Yeah. All right, y'all. So let's get into today's conversation. I think, for the past couple of months with the pandemic and, just overall with the system that's, screwing the hell out of black students and families, like there's been a lot of conversation around reimagining education for Black kids, right? And I don't think we can have this conversation without the voices and the brilliance of Black educators. And so that's what we have today. We have Mr. Jason Terrell, Mr. Sharif El Mackey here to chime in on that conversation, because people need to hear it. Otherwise, if we keep going the way that we're going, talking about reimagining education, is going to look like the same ass shit show, So I just want to, for people who don't understand how oppressive the system has been or suppressive the system has been against Black teachers, like what's the history behind that? Because we talk a lot about Brown versus Board of Education as if it, did a lot for our community and stuff like that, when, it had some disadvantages. So what's been the historical pieces or the historical obstacles that have kept Black teachers out of the system and out of classrooms?
That's a good one. I think that it definitely connects to the pattern of oppression that we've seen, right? Education is a gateway, it's a tool to freedom. And even when our Black communities were at their strongest, we think about the reasons why there were the Atlanta race riots and the massacre that happened in Tulsa, because during that time we were together. We were educating our own children. We were investing in our own communities. And so when we integrated schools, we gave away our power, because we took our children and put our children into what we thought were better educational systems, right? But we again got the short end of the stick. So now we are basically suffering because if we speak out against any injustices, the system retaliates against us. And I know a lot of teachers that have been in that same situation, especially throughout the pandemic. There were so many marches and protests led by teachers, but as soon as it was time to re-sign those contracts and school to get back started, you slowly but surely started to see less and less of those things happening. So, yeah.
I mean, to your point, Jason, one of my favorite podcasts, I hadn't listened to a while, but it's called the Revisionist Podcast, like Malcolm Gladwell. So he had an episode, maybe it was episode like 2, but the woman's name was Miss Jackie. So she was a former educator from North Carolina, and she basically broke down a lot of like the history behind Brown v. Board of Education and how basically Black teachers, principals were pushed out of the school system. And I'm a history buff. I definitely would refer to elders to share the story, but this is the research and things that I've learned. Even the schools of education were started right after Brown v. Board of Education. And, we think about schools of education are historically pretty homogenous, like white women are part of schools of ed, but it's a reason why, like Praxis, all the North Carolina Praxis, Gates in Atlanta, like all these tests came about. A lot of it was like to keep certain folks out of the profession. And so it's interesting how like the historical nature of legislation impacts the work today. But I feel you on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible when you really think about it. I mean, Dr. Fuller has been collecting. I'm sorry, not Dr. Fuller. Dr. Greg Carr, down at Howard University, has been collecting these, compendiums almost of Black teacher associations, where they had because of racism, they weren't allowed into the unions, right? The teachers union. So they had their own, and their focus was around Black students in the communities that they lived in, right? Like, and how to, empower through education the children. And once they kind of merged, it got lost. And I'm excited. I see Mama Toya in the chat, and as well as our youth this summer through the center will be reading Lost Education of Horace Tate, and reading about Vanessa Siddle Walker and some of her other work, and just like what that means. But I would say like when you think about the suppression, Tanisha, as you talked earlier, the suppression of Black educators, you think about it, that started with enslavement, right? They weren't slaves that were taken and forced into horrific conditions. These were, doctors and leaders and farmers and educators, right? Educators was a part of that, right? And so when you talk about like the suppression, making sure that you couldn't speak in your native language. We said earlier, like there's this quote around the first weapon that was outlawed by the oppressor was the drum, right? This form of communication, this form of organizing, this cultural experience, but also of communication, right? That was outlawed, right? So all of these things. So imagine how many educators, how many people had children and youth circling them that were on these ships through the Middle Passage, right? Right. And so that suppression started super earlier, where you loss of, and as educators and as communal people, at the risk of life or limb, right? You're teaching somebody a word or a letter or how to read and write, right? Like, and so that was another piece. And so you just continue that thread. And I think that's why it's so important, that we tell the whole story, not just, oh, here's this marker, Supreme Court, they did right by Black children, and not telling all the other pieces that continue to reverberate throughout history.
That's good. So I would like to add, like the culture itself was extremely anti-Black and extremely dismissive the second integration happened, because they were trying to, balance the schools out. Specifically in Tulsa, what they did was they took some of the Black teachers and they moved them to white schools, right? Because they had to meet their little quota. Well, if you're a Black teacher and you're suddenly being snatched out of your community, just like they did the Black kids, right? And you're putting them into an all-white environment that is hostile, they're going to quit.
Right.
Because your mind and your spirit and your body can only take so much of that. And so that's what happened. A lot of those teachers just didn't last. They took the best Black teachers out of, where God had intended them to be at.
So that's push out, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
Strategically done.
Not just for students, right? Like
right. It's a whole ass strategy against us. And it's one of the things that I'm, interested in is the conversation around, or the notion that if you put Black kids next to white kids, then they'll automatically perform better. That integration theory.
That's that magical pixie dust.
Right. Right. That
real.
frustrates me every time. And that's one of the things, like, I don't necessarily believe in, I believe in being exposed to diversity, right? To being around different people, which is why, I grew up on the South Side of Chicago and I went to predominantly Black and Latinx schools. And that's why I chose not to go to an HBCU, because I did want to be around some white people and some Asian people and stuff like that, but this notion that we have to be in the same space with them in order to be better people is crazy, and that's what it looks like with schooling. And, even with shutting down schools in Black communities and forcing kids out of their communities and even out of their cities, when there's an abundance of seats open in a lot of white communities. I mean, that's what's going on here in Chicago. I don't know if it looks like that in y'all cities, but, it's that again, that mindset that Black kids can't perform well in their own communities or in their own classrooms amongst their own people.
No, that's good. And I think, too often we don't boldly have the conversation about how charter schools connect to that, because there are a lot of charter schools that are not ran by us, that don't have the best intention for our children, even though that's what they claim to do. Case in point, in Atlanta, over the last 5 years within the city of Atlanta, we have had incidents with white operated charter schools with blackface, like more than one time, happening year after year after year. So when is it not a mistake? When it makes the news and everyone has seen this and this district has talked about it and it's been publicly discussed and it continues to happen. So, we all play a role in how these things happen. And I'm driving the point of ownership, right? Within our own schools, within our own educational systems. I'll stop there.
Right. So, go ahead.
I was going to say to your point around the chart. I know this wasn't the conversation, but I mean, it's interesting. I live in Atlanta, but I spent the last almost decade in the Carolinas. And in North Carolina, the charter legislation is crazy. So there's like maybe one or two Black-led charters. Most of your charters who are serving white students, they do exactly that. But actually in North Carolina, charters are seen as a reverse kind of segregation. So now your charters are essentially white flight schools. And so, like, you have these, they have all the money, they have the government resources, and their parents are, basically exiting their kids out of the public school system because, we have in Charlotte specifically, there's a Black man who's a superintendent, is doing dope work, but it's just that image. They don't want to be connected to it. So it's interesting how every context, it looks a little different,
That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Philly, 1/3 of the most of the students in the public school system are, Black and brown. And then 1/3 of the schools are charters. And so they are, many of them, not all of them, depend on the neighborhood, but most of them have a, significant number of students of color. A lot of times even more so than the city's magnet schools, which would fall under the traditional system. But yeah, that context piece is everything.
Yeah.
Really interesting, to add to that point, in Oklahoma, we have the so-called 5 civilized tribes, right? And we have, the Black freedmen that came with those, with the natives through the Trail of Tears. So we have a pretty interesting racial mix in Oklahoma. So today we have charter schools, right? Where 90% of that school would be indigenous. And then we'll have a Black school, or we'll see a charter school where the majority of the kids that go to that school are Black, or the majority of the kids will go to another charter school that's Latinx. So, I mean, this is definitely something that needs to kind of be discussed. And if you go and ask the indigenous families that attend that school, they'll say, "Oh, well, we came over here because we want our kids to have their culture intact with them as they're learning, how to become a model citizen someday." And it's the same thing with the Black parents, and it's the same thing with the Latinx parents. They don't want them to, they don't want their own culture to feel foreign to their kids. And I completely understand that. But at the same time, we've got people that are publishing books saying, well, school choice leads to segregation. And it's like, damn, like, how do I like really argue against that thing, without seeming like I'm pro segregation, because I'm totally not. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's why terms are so important. When I look at research where they're saying, oh, this promotes segregation, and then you look at what segregation actually is. Right. That's not the same thing, but a lot of times it's lumped into the same salad bowl, right? And not like that's different. And if I'm my parents, when they put me in an all Black school, the segregation wasn't a thing. It was like protection. If anything, is what they were thinking. Protection for their children, intellectually, emotionally, culturally. Like that's what they were thinking. Segregation is a device that's used by people in power to force one group, in some part. And the other thing, when everyone loves to talk about integration, first thing I want to see integrated is those bank accounts. Like integrate that first, then come talk to me about my school, where I put my child. You know what I'm saying? That's integrate that first.
Integrate the bag.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Let's get into how this absence of Black educators in the classroom is affecting our kids, because we already have kind of a deflated pipeline, right? A deflated pipeline in the sense that our kids they don't see us in the classroom, so they're not saying that I want to become a teacher. And then we talked about the suppression of
they only want to be a student, Tanisha.
Right. I mean,
they're like, I'm out.
Right.
Yeah.
So how is that affecting our kids? Like, what are y'all seeing in the kids that y'all work with? What conversations are y'all having, and what are they talking about?
Yeah. So I think that it's a lot of different conversations that are happening. There are some kids who feel safe, at school because of what's happening at home, right? What's going on in the community. There are other students that hate school because of how teachers talk to them. And it's not just our colleagues, it's us too. Those of us who are far removed, we do have the Black elite and Black conservatives that are teaching in schools too. And their idea is, well, you should be doing better because they're far removed from poverty or the hood or lower income communities or Title I communities. They're removed from that. So they can't identify with the child. And so it goes a little bit beyond race when we talk about equity in regards to what type of teachers are standing before students, because we want the right teachers that have the right mindset in empowering Black children. And that's not something that you can easily just find or say, oh, that's a Black body, so they're going to do it and they're going to do it well.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's something we promote. I mean, we work primarily with men of color, Black male teachers, but it's even like the whole notion of, not every Black male teacher is the right teacher for the student. There's some, my co-founder, but some brothers in our program who've been harmed by Black males in their school building before. And I was a classroom teacher for a while, and definitely saw that from coaches, from other men in the building. So I agree with you. It's deeper than race. I mean, race as a core factor of it, but it's class, it's gender identities, it's everything that everything that kind of comes together as one.
Yeah. One of our Raymond Roy Pace, who's in the fellowship, one of the founding members, he started this Why I Teach tour to go talk to youth. And so we would visit high schools and colleges and share with them, like, hey, this is why I teach, this. And some of them would share, like, hey, I'm having a miserable experience as a student. Why in the world would I think about returning to this building once I leave here? If I stay here to graduate, or if I leave before then, I ain't coming back, because it's a source of pain for me. At one of the Black Male Educator convenings, the BMEX, Chris Emden talked about, for some Black youth, it's like considering becoming a teacher is like returning to the scene of a crime against yourself, because that's based on what you experience. So in this Why I Teach tour, what we did was three things seem to really resonate. Four things. One, if you had a great teacher, try to pay it forward, right? And emulate that, right? Stand on their shoulders, lift as you climb, those kind of philosophies. A second piece that seemed to really resonate with youth who had negative experiences was consider becoming the teacher you wish you had and knew you needed.
Wow.
Right? Like the change, you can be part of breaking the cycle, and that can be a form of resistance, which leads me into the third point, where the youth seem to be invigorated when they are able to, reason why I ultimately decided to become an educator, was that there's a direct correlation and connection between pursuing racial justice and educational justice, that they are so deeply intertwined. Fighting for one ultimately lands you fighting for both. And so that seemed, youth activists seem to like, oh, wait a minute, teaching is a form of activism. And like, yeah, it's like the purest form of activism is teaching and preparing the next generation of young group. And the fourth thing that the youth responded to was this idea that, you know what, your younger brother, your younger sister, your sibling, eventually your own children, your neighbors will be in those very same seats. Do you want to leave it as is, or do you want to jack things up and fix it in a way that only you would be able to? And so that seemed to really get their attention, and ends up having where over the past couple of years we've had over 80 high school and college youth serving as teacher apprentices.
Can I ask another question? This is not because these are questions that I just have on my mind, and anybody could jump in, but because I think that when you talk about teaching is a form of activism, right? In a system that doesn't allow that space for activism, what does it mean to be an activist as an educator? What does it mean to be a liberator in education? Because education can also be an oppressive. So what does that mean, and what does it look like in a system where you almost, because Jason, you went through this, where it's I'm going to be an effective educator, I'm going to be an advocate, I'm going to be an activist, but the system is telling you no. And so now you got to choose between that liberation and your job. What does that look like, and how can people even navigate that in the space that won't allow them to do so?
Well, I mean, it's just that it's a system of oppression. And so teachers who are like-minded, right? Those who want to see the best outcome for Black and brown children in public schools, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you speak out, they're going to come after you. They make examples of people. So they make it clear that if you try to buck the system, this is what is going to happen. We've seen this in America before. It's the same pattern, nothing new. They do the same thing over and over. And so, so many people are victimized by the system. They are not, willing to speak out against it. And that's what we have to do. We have to speak out against it so that people understand that, it's not just happening to one person, because a lot of Black teachers go through that, especially if you want to build up your career, if you went and you received several degrees, right, to advance in a field that isn't welcoming to Black educators, but Black educators are needed at the top levels in this field so that we can change the dynamics. But of course, it's not set up that way. And you have to be willing to sacrifice a lot to get to the point of making the true change that needs to happen.
Yeah.
I want to piggyback and just highlight Jason. I think teachers are there. It's the purest form of activism, but oftentimes I don't think we understand the value of our voice. Our voice is needed in almost every sector, in every space, especially when you think about policy and state decisions. So Jason, you're a great example of someone who's used their experience as a platform to communicate and advocate. There's a lot of others who a lot of teachers generally, who I guess from that storytelling, that voice standpoint, don't understand how powerful that is and that experience is. So I would just push and say we have to continue to leverage our genius, because as teachers, we're geniuses in our own right and respect. And oftentimes I don't think we see ourselves that way because the society, the system doesn't see ourselves. We don't respect teachers to that degree. So I just want to push and say, one, highlight Jason, but also use you as an example of you have a powerful voice and we need to continue to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I appreciate everything, and I agree with all of that. I would add, a lot of times, we know the oldest trick in the book is divide and conquer, and a lot of times people think that means for people who are being oppressed, the victim of the oppression, to fight amongst themselves. that's one example of divide and conquer. But the probably most prolific example of divide and conquer is making people feel that they are alone. Right.
Oh,
And so
wow.
making educators feel alone, that's the real division. That's the deeper division. Because if you feel that you are isolated, you feel that you're alone, you feel like you're the only one experiencing it, then you can't band together. You won't even think to band together. You're like, I'm alone, why even share this? Or I'm alone and I'm vulnerable. Right. But if educators really saw, like, you know what? Oh no, like we're actually together. And yes, there will be sacrifices, right? Like, but which of our ancestors will we look in their face? And I understand I'm speaking from a position of privilege that, you know, came into education with a mindset of like, you know, and it wasn't me alone. We had a group of brothers, you know, that were like, hey, you know what? Hey, fella, we would break our meetings like, yo, don't be afraid to be fired if it's for kids. You know, like that's how we would converse with each other, you know, as we were young teachers and then later young principals. We all kind of came up in the system together. And so I think it's this duality. While we're doing that, the internal work, we also need a group of folks who are, you know, maroons, right? And doing things, building institutions on their own and in the mountains or down the street, like whatever it is, like to make sure that, hey, there's a, you know, a duality in the in this work and that we're not alone. Right. And so when we used to tell our staff that, you know, every lesson plan is a political document and every time you teach is a political act, because you're revealing what you believe about the children, despite what the administrator may feel, despite what you know, the system may, you know, endorse, right? And it doesn't mean just be creative for creativity's sake. Sometimes the most revolutionary teachers are just making sure that their kids are highly literate because the system is producing kids who aren't, right? So every time you are advancing quality education and teaching Black children well, like, and when we say political, we're not talking about Democrat, Republican, or Green Party, any of that. It's like, you know what? When James Baldwin said teaching Black children is a revolutionary act, I would just say change it a little bit to say teaching Black children well is the revolutionary act. That in itself is a political act, and it's counter. It shouldn't be revolutionary, but unfortunately, it is. You know.
Yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah, we got some good stuff in the chat. Like Shantae in Indianapolis, she's a, you know, one of our sisters in the struggle and educator, and she was saying that, you know, she's facing some bullying and retaliation because, you know, she's a revolutionary teacher or educator, you know, administrator actually. So, you know, I hope, Shantae, that helped a little bit. And then we also touched on Monique's comment about the system will never allow us to properly educate Black kids, Black minds. And so talking about those independent systems, those freedom schools, which we'll get to later, is important. So we got some people, we all on one accord, you know, so I'm happy. I mean,
Shantae is Barnes.
Yep.
Okay, all right. You know what? I've always called Educator Barnes. I
know Educator Barnes.
I'm
yes.
like, wait, but who's Shantae?
I'm sorry about government out there, right? I'm just putting everybody class. E.O. Warren, Shantae government name. I'm sorry.
I know you done threw it out there. She was trying to be incognito and whatnot.
Right.
It's important that we uplift these stories though, because, you know, even in sharing my own story, I kind of knew, like, strategically, because the system has strategically planned against us. So if you're going to play the game with the system, you have to be strategic. And towards the end, you know, of the fight, I was like, okay, well, if they, you know, take me out of the classroom, did I lose? Because they haven't changed anything. And I want them to change their behavior. So even if they feel like they got me, they can't do that to somebody else. And we have to be willing to think in that mindset. But I come from a family of activists and educators, and I definitely believe in everything that El Mekki, and also, you know, in him quoting James Baldwin, like, we have the blueprints before us, and we know that we're going to have to sacrifice in some areas to make change, you know, on a greater scale. But we also have to have a cushion. And that was one of the things that when people say, oh, we ain't our ancestors, you're damn right we not, because they had a plan. Like, they knew that if we're going to have people on the front lines, we have to have a cushion for them. So Ali Pat, right? You know, his mansion right up the street from where my parents' house is, you know, he used to house Malcolm X and those activists that, you know, travel to and fro to, you know, propel civil rights and Black rights. You know, they hid out in the basements of these people's homes. But that's how the elite and the entertainers put their coins together to make sure that these people had a safe haven. There was a cushion, there was a backup. And so what is our backup? What is our cushion when these teachers that are using their voices to speak out against the injustices of our children, what is our backup plan?
Right.
What are we going to do? What are we as a community going to do to protect our teachers that are protecting our children?
Well,
yeah, not just the wealthy, right? People like you are with these platforms, right? Like sometimes you're providing the cover that's needed, and then getting people's attention, right? Like, and it's one thing if somebody says like, hey, here's a blog Nehemiah wrote, Tanisha wrote, Jason wrote, and they're sharing that, even sharing it with their children, right? With their students. Well, their students are reading some of this and they're like, oh, that's what's going on behind the curtain. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's a different level of agitation too.
Lift the veil.
Just to talk about like what y'all doing, El Mekki and Jason, like talk about what's going on at the Center for Black Educator and Profound Gentlemen. Like that's that's preparing us to be fighters and to be advocates and activists and revolutionaries. So talk about the work that y'all doing in rebuilding and strengthening these pipelines.
Yeah, I mean, I can everything. I was going to comment on Shreve's point around feeling a sense of isolation, and I think that's kind of the core of our work. Like we work a lot in the South. Our headquarters is in Charlotte, and a lot of our we work with some men who are the only Black men in their entire districts. And so think about that feeling of isolation and that feeling of being alone. So it's interesting when I think about context. Cities like larger cities, of course, have a lot more diversity and a lot of folks of color. Black folks specifically on staff, but a lot of these small counties in the South, some of these folks are alone. I know Jason, you have a great relationship with the teacher of the year in Arkansas, who was a Black male. We looked at some of the numbers, actually pulled some of the numbers of how many men of color teach in Arkansas. You probably count them on two hands, And so that sense of isolation is important. So that's what we do. Our big mission is to build communities of men of color who provide a profound additional impact on boys of color. And so we built these like small pockets, we call them like cohorts of Black male teachers and Latino male teachers across the country. We have about 23 cohort groups with about 450 teachers who participate, all from everywhere from undergrad all the way through school leadership. And our big vision is retention. Like we want to make sure that we pour into these men so that they have the opportunity to like live out their purpose serving students. But the main idea is to build a sense of community and like to really cut out the idea of isolation. Because everything that Sharif, I looked at you as the godfather of this, but everything you said was spot on in terms of just that feeling of isolation is real. And I was a classroom teaching 100%. Felt that I was alone and that my voice really, didn't matter. And I didn't have other comrades and the work to lean on. But when we come together and have a collective voice, and we can move mountains. So that's a little bit about our work.
So are you saying that the retention rate is affected by the isolation that some of these Black male educators feel? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many it's over 20 national surveys and studies around why teachers of color leave the classroom. Black men, we leave the classroom about 5 times higher than any other demographic. And one of the main reasons why we leave the classroom specifically is the feeling like we have no agency or the feeling of isolation. There's a recent report by the Ed Trust that came out last year, 2019. John King, former Secretary of Education, led that particular. He's the ED of the program.
He's still our Secretary of Ed.
He's still ours. He's still mine at least. But he put out a big research called "If You Listen, We Will Stay," and it talked about the voices of teachers of color, and he had 5 core reasons why these teachers leave. But again, in that was not feeling a sense of agency, like you had a voice, feeling like you had a sense of isolation, not having adequate opportunities to grow and lead. A lot of it was very systemic issues, nothing that teachers were doing specifically what the system kind of around them caused. And so we as an organization, we don't hit all of those areas, and we try to play our role in a lot of different ways. But the main area that we like to target is that isolation. And we really think about that community and the relationship as the core of our work.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, when we started the Fellowship Black Male Educators for Social Justice, part of our vision was uniting with, profound gentlemen and just continuing to doing the work. And I think there's still, a lot of space to do that, because originally it was, there were Black men who in Philly came together, as diverse as we are. The state of Pennsylvania, 96% of the teachers are white, and so the state-wise is very different, and then it's systemic, right? You would see how HBCUs in Pennsylvania are underfunded, and what impact does that have? That's where many aspiring or potential Black teachers may be coming out of. But if it's underfunded, then it's going to impact who ends up in front of the classroom.
The administration was funding HBCUs.
I was just thinking that, like, ain't Trump trying to push that to get our vote? Like, we investing in HBCUs, and you telling us that's a lie?
What means
out here lying in these streets?
Man, it wouldn't be his first, you know.
Yeah, I'm about to say it would not be his first at all.
I lost track of, they have those fact finders. The last time I looked at the amount of lies that came out of this, like it was like crazy. And I know there are many politicians who lie, but the number was astronomical. And some of it's just like dumb lies, right?
Hold on, real quick, Matt. For those of y'all watching, we have PSA. President Trump is a liar. We just uncovered the shit on the show. In case you didn't know, he lies. God damn, I'm shocked. I'm sorry. Go ahead, El Mekki.
No, I would say to build on, the fellowships work, which was, specifically around Black men. We launched the Center for Black Educator Development, and really standing on 4 pillars. We call them 4 Ps, 4 pillars. She said lies and flies. Christine, you made me lose my train of thought. All right, so
the 4 pillars,
is around
brother.
policy. What are policies that are aligned to educational justice issues? Because all of this stuff, it's not just a pipeline. There are the things around it, or what are the prerequisites to become a Black educator, right? Like, what are all those kind of things? So policy, pipeline itself. When we started the fellowship, these 17 Black men, well educated, several had their PhDs. All of them really good looking, all of that. Like, none of us had been approached to become Black educators, when we were in high school or in college. It wasn't until we had all graduated. So 17 Black men graduated from college. And then we were approached like, hey, you want to teach the kids that look like you? Where we said, hey, let's, when we came together and realized that, we said, let's talk to our colleagues. Most of them were white women. And the average response when they were tapped on the shoulder was 3rd grade. So 3rd grade for one demographic, hey, you should consider, becoming a teacher. You'll be great. The other ones, not till college, right? And so we want to dive in much earlier and engage high school and college youth. That's the pipeline. Black pedagogy, like, people talk about like, oh, we're not prepared to teach Black children. Well, what if great Black teachers? You talk about pre-Brown versus Board. What were these teachers? They face traumatic experiences. They face, poverty, right? This is from after, enslavement on, like that was some traumatic-ish too. Right. So how were they still finding ways to educate Black children well? What was their common sense of purpose? This, this community approach, right? And that's Black pedagogy that was instilled in a lot of that. And you see that around is things that that we feel like we could capture, and teacher colleges aren't promoting it a lot of times. And then the I would say the last one. Well, that was it. The policy, pedagogy, pipeline. Oh, and then the last one is professional learning. Like great teachers have great coaching, great mentoring, and so we provide all of that both to Black teachers. But then also anyone teaching Black children, because we know mindset, skill, and will are kind of the 3 components that are the foundation of a great teacher. You don't have a mindset. We all opened up the show talking about people's mindset. And it doesn't matter whether, if they look like us, if their mindset is jacked up, if they have anti-Black tendencies and they're leading a classroom, it might be even more damaging to a child. Yeah. Even if a white teacher does it, where they're like, well, I've seen your role in history in my people and in my community, but man, you look like my uncle and you're doing this. You look like my parents and doing this. So it can have a bigger impact.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's important we have conversations about needing more Black educators. We need to really identify what kind of Black educators we need, because everybody ain't good in the classroom, or they have some biases themselves and, need to get those together. I knew early on that I couldn't teach. I didn't have the patience. I didn't, I used to tutor, and I'm like, honestly, no shade. I ain't had time for this little boy to stutter through this reading lesson. I'm like, I ain't got the patience. So let me just know that Tanisha don't be a teacher. We have to cross that one off the list. But people need to realize that, because again, some cities, they have being an educator pays well, and so they'll go through that and be an educator, but their heart isn't in it. That's and they're messing our kids up. So some people need to recognize that. And when we talk about needing more Black educators, we need to talk about what kind of educators we need, because again, all skin folk ain't kinfolk either. You know, so I think, you know, we need to really have those conversations, like for real.
Listen, one of the most devastating. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, MLK. I was just saying the teaching is a gift.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is a gift. It's an honor. You have to, you know, and yeah, you need patience, right? Like, and you know, you need patience and a sense of urgency. So you need both, right? You know, because some people are so patient. You know, kids get through 13 years of school. They're like, hey, you know, we're just being patient. We're just gonna wait till later and all that. So you can't have that, but you need you know, you need urgency for outcomes and patience with the human being that's sitting in front of you. But one of the most devastating sentences I ever heard as a 21-year-old teacher was another teacher telling me, you know, I don't like kids. And I thought she was joking. You know, I'm like, she's like, no, I don't like kids. I'm like, she was a veteran. I'm like, why are you here? Like, I mean, it blew my mind. And I was young and naive and just like, how's that possible? That's impossible. And then, but you know, she was just you know, a precursor for what I would see over the course of my career. She wasn't alone.
I hope you told on her.
Do you remember the grade?
You got to expose that too.
Mm-hmm. I didn't. You know, that's one of the things that, you know, but it was one of the things that I was new. Everybody else knew it. But then again, it goes back to like the protection, you know, and the kids, you know, like when parents would come up and say, Mike, don't put my child in that class. Right. You know, that kind of thing that, you know, really saw. So she eventually left as, you know, when you have that kind of internal pressure, even if they have protections, you know, you can sift through some of that madness.
Hey, Tanisha and Neo, one of the comments, maybe to us and our special guest today, was around, is there a national teacher association for Black educators and Black teachers? So I just wanted to talk that up to see if anybody had any resources. And the last part of that question was, if not, how can we get that going? Right.
Facts.
You know what? I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of regional work being done.
Yeah.
I know there are national groups on Facebook, but it doesn't necessarily mean, so it may be like community, but they may not necessarily be organizing, right? And so you have a lot of different you know, Black Educators Rock and National Association of Black School Administrators. So you have a lot of different associations and groups. I think a lot of the folks that I'm associated with, and I would love to hear what Jason's thoughts are, there's a lot of folks are organized around the work itself. And so you look at Profound Gentlemen, I'm sure they have a whole, not only network of people they're serving, but the network of people that are supporting the people that they're serving, right? And so you have this network. The same with the Center for Black Educator Development. We have, you know, the high school and college youth that we're working with through Freedom Schools. But then we have a ton of educators who are part of our, you know, orbit, who are supporting the work, you know, the same way. So yeah, I think I see a lot of folks who are doing it. You got Black Teacher Collaborative, you got the Black Teacher Project, you have, you know, Black Male Educators Alliance up in the, you know, the Midwest. So there are a lot of groups. I do think that there are ways, and, you know, and Jason and I were part of this, you know, we're Black Teacher Project and Black Teacher Collaborative. We're like helping to organize, you know, one, seeing like who are all the groups out there, and then trying to organize them so that we decide to be fingers or fists, right? And I think this is a time that we really need to unite and solidify our collective work and positions.
Y'all see, they said bring Bayo back. So Sharif gone. We got to get Dr. Fuller on the phone and bring Bayo.
That would be dope, though.
Listen, when he put out that RFP to take it over, like, listen, I was sitting there. I had that printed application. I was like, you know what? I was still sitting principal too. I was like, you know what? I might die trying to do. You know, I was like, you know what? Somebody else got it. It just seemed like to be too much. But yeah.
And just to piggyback off Sharif, I think that's not enough. I mean, there's a lot of regional groups. A lot of us are sitting on the work itself. There are not too many folks. I keep seeing. I think it's Monique mentioned like unions. Or just folks who are in an advocacy space. I know Sharif, you do, you know, a lot of work in the policy work space. I personally don't see a lot of work around systems level change. I know a lot of the work that we do isn't, you know, we do a lot of direct service work supporting educators' hearts and minds. But there does need to be some type of collaboration around like how we target. You know, I know state policies, it looks different across the state, but federal policy, you know, as well. And if that is like a collaboration of groups, as I like the finger fist idea or analogy, Or is that, another body that does a lot of the policy or systems oriented work? Something needs to be done. So I definitely, I know there's a lot of space for collaboration, but, I believe like even for PG, we thought about like, how do we continue to stay in our lane and really get good at what we're good at, and just support other folks and other work where needed. So we're always looking to partner and collaborate.
And I think that's an ongoing conversation that we've had on TDRS is about how we collaborate. Like we do have, as Toya mentioned, people working in silos and, kind of doing the same thing. And the power is in us working together collectively. And so, really understanding where our individual lanes are, our group's lanes are, and working again, like so we have a group working to build the teacher pipeline around the country. They work on that. If we have a group working on like curriculum, we work on that. But bringing all these efforts together so that we can attack it as one is important. So, that's definitely an ongoing conversation and something that we need to actually build. But we got a few minutes left, y'all, and we finna get into a hefty part of the conversation because we talk about how oppressive the traditional system has been, and we've had so many conversations in reimagining education.
Oh no!
So what does that look like? How does that work right now?
You cut out just a little bit. Can you repeat? Yeah,
I froze. You know what? My internet acting really Atlanta-ish today. I paid my bill, y'all. I promise I did. But I'm in my office and it's a little janky up here, so y'all forgive Comcast and my weak Wi-Fi signal. But how do we begin to build these freedom schools and the urgency around the need outside of the traditional system? Because I don't think we can just, remove ourselves from the system right now, but we need to prepare for some kind of exodus or some kind of liberation in education so our kids can get what they need. So what does it look like and how do we get started?
So I'll kick us off, and then I would love to hear Jason and then Mekhi's thoughts on this, as well as you and Neo. But I think, and I keep referencing this only because I want more people to read this. But in Powernomics, it talks about the need to reform our educational system where we are actually leading it. And what is the blueprint that our ancestors used? So, we have the design, but we don't have the pipeline that's connected. We need to be in control of early learning centers and HBCUs, but seminaries, but also traditional public schools, non-traditional public schools, the freedom schools, the independent schools, open campuses, because again, everyone learns differently, right? From tech schools to Christian academies to even private schools. Like we need to have control of these things from every level of when a child first starts learning in a communal setting, which we will say is pre-K, all the way to higher learning. Like we need to make sure that we have a pipeline of schools that we are supporting that are led by us, where the curriculum is designed by us, where our kids are really understanding the true history of America and our place in it. And I think that's where it starts. All right.
Naturally, yeah, because you've done this, you're doing it. So we definitely, want to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason brings up a good point. I can't help but to always think about, there was, let's call it pre-Brown. I think there were more people who looked at education as the way, right? Like as the, I'm going to imagine that the basket you're going to put, they're saying don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, before we did put all our eggs in the education basket, so many of the families, right? Like it was this communal thing, right? After that got, blown up, what you saw were Black families saying like, wait a minute, this is the outcome. My kids are being pushed out. My kids are having these horrendous school-based experiences. I'm not seeing the outcomes. So maybe I don't need to put all of my eggs in this basket, because if I do, they're going to get smashed. They're going to be cracked and smashed, as far as like that egg in the basket analogy. And so people started like trying to find other ways to support communities and their children and things where you saw less of that. I think, one of the things we have to do is find, back to that safety thing, right? Like make it safe to put your eggs, majority of your eggs in the educational basket. And in order to do that, we need not only the institutions, schools, but we also need, as you said, like this educational ecosystem. How do we create that in a way? And, we invested in freedom schools as just one way. We wanted to have build on the freedom school movement, but way back on Charlie Cobb's memo to SNCC about, hey, we need to do something for the children in Mississippi, not just for the adults. Mama Marion Wright Edelman, where her view, what did she said something to the effect of racism is America's original birth defect, and if we apply that to schools, she's saying like, hey, we need like a detox center, right? And so they started this summer piece. And so we just tried to build on what they created and their legacies and said, hey, suppose we use this not only as this detox center, this empowerment center, but also a teacher apprenticeship, where high school students, college students get clinical experience in teaching in their communities, teaching first, second, and third graders early literacy techniques. Not everything, but let's specifically focus on phonics and reading comprehension. And then they also get the coaching that a great teacher would have, right? And so they have workshops throughout the time. They're being observed as they're teaching. They get feedback. They get help with their lesson plan. So they go through this whole thing as early as their freshman year in high school, as opposed to many teacher prep programs. You don't get that till the second half of your senior year when you do student teaching, right? And then you arrive there and you're like, oh, maybe you'll stay, maybe you won't. But so many studies talk about that new teachers are saying that they're not prepared to teach Black and brown children. Well, a lot of that is around the mindset. They're not connected to them. They don't understand the pedagogy. They don't understand the context with which they should be teaching from. And so we use Freedom Schools as our model to start that process of teacher preparation.
So, Sharif, are you saying that we should be funding the teacher pipeline to begin in high school?
Oh yeah, I think it's way too late. Afterwards, I think we should invest in CTE programs as teacher prep, but it all has to be aligned to the pedagogy that will be effective with Black children, not just any old program, right? Like it has to be a very specific backwards design model where we're saying, hey, we want better student outcomes, because ultimately that's why we started the center. I'm sure that's why Jason started Profound Gentlemen. Was student outcomes was the difference. If Pennsylvania was 96% white and we had great Black student outcomes, we'd be having a different type of conversation.
Yeah, true.
We're saying it's 96% white and Black boys are graduating high school at like a 57% clip.
Yeah.
Right. And so they were like, there's something to skew. Then you apply the research, things that we've always known, but then the research like, hey, a single Black teacher, a Black child is almost 40% less likely to drop out, and 20% more likely to go to college. You put all that stuff together, it's still student outcomes at the crux of it. And it's like, okay, here's a strategy. The teaching, those who lead the classrooms in our schools and school boards, et cetera, they need to be different. They need to share the common experience of their students.
That's actually just to piggyback, like the data point that started us, I was in a master's program and I read somewhere, I think it was the Scott's report. It's like only 2 states in the country to have a high school graduation rate of over 80% for Black boys. So I don't know if y'all can guess which two states they were, but they were Maine and Vermont, And so those are the 2 states that have the smallest percentage.
All 10 of their Black children.
And it's only 3, right? I'm like, there's 3 Black people in each state.
And 96% of all your teachers are white. And so if you think about this, like, to me, that was like, that didn't add up for me. I mean, it makes sense. It's like if you had, and there's plenty of data, like John Hopkins did a report. I mean, Sharif just referenced it. 13, you have 1 Black child by 3rd grade, you have a 13% likelihood of graduating from high school. You have 2, it's a 37%. And it increases from there. So there's already overwhelmingly a lot of data that show, just having Black teachers present, period, at least, will have like an extraordinary effect on Black students, especially for Black boys. But again, just all the numbers are there. It's just like I think Jason mentioned, it's the pipeline, and it's making it. I hate to say it, but it's making the case sometimes to districts of why Black teachers are important. We work with a lot of districts across the state of North Carolina, but just generally, and that's always like a push or a conversation. And I've had a lot of districts tell me, I just want a teacher in my building, and I get it 100%. But it's kind of like the idea of like the all teachers matter versus like, we had those conversations happen all the time in HR decisions. So I know there's a lot of, we didn't really get too far into that piece, but it's a lot of layers to it.
Yeah. So I think it's a good time. El Mekki, you want me to go ahead and cue this video?
Oh yeah, go ahead. So I mean, again, this is the way that we've built on Freedom Schools. We have a high school students working with college students. And so it's like this multi-generational, and then they're coached by master level teachers, right? Like experts in their field. And so they get the coaching, the mentoring, but the high school students are also mentored by the college students, right? And so when we were in person, a high school kid was in a college kid's classroom and they're teaching first, second, and third graders, right? So you have this multi-generational piece. Now that they are virtual, we didn't have the high school in the virtual classroom kind of thing. It was just a coach supporting it. The high school students worked with an individual one-on-one. The college students had 4 or 5 first, second, and third graders in their classroom, and then they're being coached. But it was still this idea of positive racial identity, empowerment, voice, and most importantly, Black literacy. So I shouldn't say most importantly, it's all combined, like it's all together. So this is just a little clip of like the work that we were doing, and we're grateful to have met children from all around the country because it was virtual. It didn't have to be in person. So as far away as California, they were participating in our Freedom Schools model this summer, Freedom Schools Literacy Academy.
That's dope.
So we about to play this clip for y'all. This is a new thing for TDR as we stepping our game up. But y'all keep my Wi-Fi in prayer. I'm about to share my screen and pull the clip up.
I have a public service announcement ready just in case.
There we go. Y'all see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, there we go.
Coronavirus cases in the city earlier. I love being Black.
We're having so much fun reading and learning new things. I have nice teachers and they look like me.
Taking things I was learning and learn more about themselves and participate in the world in a different way. It's been a formative institution in my life.
Yeah, thanks. So just a little snapshot of what was going on. But yeah, we had a great time. Parents saying like, "Hey, why are you stopping?" For this summer. We're like, we'll continue some work a little later. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sharing the link on the screen. I'm sorry, y'all. We didn't pray hard enough on my internet. I know it went out for a second, but that's why I'm sharing the link. So y'all definitely check it out. And I just want to give you guys an opportunity to provide your closing comments for the show because it's almost time for us to head out.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start. I agree with Joshua. That video was fire for sure. I think the work that you two are doing in Atlanta and in Philly is monumental work. That is, it's disruptive and it's positive. It's nation building. You have a blueprint that works to prepare the teacher pipeline, the Black teacher pipeline. And I mean, I'm excited. As soon as I hop off of here, I'm about to send this link to the superintendent in Tulsa. Say, look, you need to watch the whole video, and maybe we need to have some sort of conversation. I can introduce you to him and see if we can try to get some things worked out. Because if everybody's all on this racism, trend or whatever you want to call it right now, now's the time to make those connections. And so thank you for this gift for today. This video is definitely fire.
Yeah, I'll just say, just thank you for having me on to share more. If you want to learn more about Profound Gentlemen, go to our website, profoundgentleman.org, or any social media. It typically is either PG Educator for Twitter or Profound Gentleman for Instagram. We're pretty active on social media. You just learn more. We can always build and connect. But thank you for having me on. I look forward to hopefully returning, but also just listening as a guest. So I'm excited about the next step.
Yeah, same here. I'm grateful to be a part of this. Been watching, had the chance to see some of you all's previous shows, and it's just great when folks as individuals, when they again combine and come together on a platform like this. And so thanks for inviting us. Glad to be here with Jason, and big fan of his work as well. And I think in the Freedom School tradition is be sure to train your replacements as you lift and you climb, right? And so those two concepts are integral in the work that you all are doing, right? Which making sure that your replacements are well trained and be able to run faster than you are, see further, and be even more powerful. And then the struggle continues, and so we have to continue to lift as we climb as well. So thank you.
Sharif, they said you the Diddy of Citizen Ed, like you on all the shows and all the videos on all the
Godfather, y'all. That's much respect.
I'm grateful to be invited. You know what I mean? Like that's it's I'm proud of the work that so many of you all are doing. Like as I'm, in that 50-year-old age range, to kind of look on the landscape and see like, wow, it's so much dope work despite the barriers, right? Like folks are not intimidated by the barriers, and that's really, really good to see. Yeah.
So I'll just add to the conversation that as we are uplifting, improving the teacher pipeline, and definitely protecting and elevating the voices of Black teachers, I do want to share this from chapter 4 in Powernomics. And it says this: a failure to rethink, restructure, retrain, retool, and resume control of schools in Black communities will produce yet another crop of non-competitive Black children. And so these conversations and the work that we're doing is for our future generations. And so we want to get back what's owed to us. And it all starts with education. So again, I just encourage everyone to, connect with the resources of Profound Gentlemen, the Center for Black Educators Development. And also on next Monday at 6 p.m., check us out. We're going to be uplifting the voices of Black students in our collective or collaborative series of lifting Black voices through Atlanta and also the Black Wall Street Times. So shout out to that work as well.
Monique, he's reading from the book Powernomics.
Chapter 4.
The book of Powernomics, chapter 4. Sounded like
Dr. Claude Anderson.
Yeah.
The book of power, right? That is the real book
right.
of power.
Yeah. I just want to echo what Jason and Neo said. I just want to thank you guys for doing the hard work and the unnecessary work. It is not easy being an educator, and it's not for everybody. Everybody's not built for it. And to be an educator and beyond as a revolutionary, I just appreciate you guys, your knowledge and your hard work. So thank you so much. And thank you guys for being on the show and sharing the work that you have done and will continue to do with us, and giving us some hope, and building these pipelines. So with that, we're about to head out of TDRS. Just to give y'all a heads up, we will not be here next Monday because we're taking a break. Black people, self-care is important. So we're taking a break. TDRS won't be around next Monday. We will be back the following Monday. So until then, y'all be good, be safe, be hella Black, and be at peace. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
Peace out.